It's definitely going to be like patient specific because if you're working with somebody after like a ACL reconstruction, then you might not want them to necessarily be doing the compound movements because, like you said, they might be offloading the area that you're actually trying to load. So you probably are going to have to focus more on the isolated stuff. But then, yeah, if it's just like a general population, somebody coming in with low back pain, you might want to just try getting them moving generally, or you might not really want to isolate, like if it's their low back or something, maybe they're just like super irritable. So you want to try to like load that up in a way that maybe it's not as direct. So kind of like you mentioned, sometimes it's good to be like, this is what I want you to feel. Other times it's good to kind of like trick them into doing stuff and then be like, oh look, like your back is stronger than you may think it really is, or something like that. So
Yeah.
like very much can depend, I guess, on the person in front of you.
Yeah. And one thing that I've started doing more recently too is like you can do all of those things. You just have to be careful what order you do them. So like one way I look at it is like for my warm-ups or sorry, I should say for their warm-ups, like part of their like prep work, I'll have them do like sub-maximal isos, just like a couple sets of whatever duration they've comfortably do, or maybe what they're already doing for their homework. So that's kind of like their primer as well as like some analgesic effect there. Then I'll have them do more of their integrated movements during like their main movements, which could be jumping, it could be squatting, it could be hinging, like things that I want to build confidence and exposures to. And then at the end of the session, we go back to like, well, now at the end, like they're going to have a day or two rest at least. So now we do some like hypertrophy type work, or I have them do isolated like burnout work of the localized tissue. So now we're touching on all three of those during one session. But if I were to do it in the opposite order, if I were to do like a burnout, then do integrated, then do isolated, it wouldn't turn out so hot, right? So it's kind of a matter of like ask yourself like what is the like kind of what's the cost of doing business with a given intervention. If I give them this stuff early on that's like submaximal, they recover pretty quick from that. They can still do a lot more. If I do really intense or really like metabolically heavy work in the beginning of the session, like if I have somebody do bike sprints to start the session, and then I expect them to do sprints or like high intensity strength work after that, they're probably going to be gassed and they're not going to be able to put much out to do that, right? Versus if I do their conditioning work at the end of the session, okay, at the very end of that, they're gassed, but now they're going to have plenty of time to recover. So I think that's just part of programming in general, is always ask yourself, like, if I give this person this intervention now, what is that going to take away from the rest of the session, right? It just helps you prioritize. Because sometimes we give people things because we don't know what else to give them right now, and that's totally fine. We kind of have to ask ourselves, like, well, does that take something away from my goal for the day? Any other last questions? Head bobbing.
Have you learned anything profound with some of the equipment you have access to at Resilient? I've seen some of the Instagram posts, but have you found any like major aha moments with some of the stuff that you have access to now?
I wouldn't say profound. I think that's a very strong word. One cool thing I messed around with. So we have like force plates at the clinic I work at now. One thing that I messed around with a number of months ago is just out of curiosity. Like I was messing around with some basic movements like goblet squats, like RDLs, where I basically put my feet on the force plates and I looked at how the actual expression of force changed depending on like basic things like tempo. So it was really cool to see, like, if you take the same, I literally took like a 45-pound kettlebell and I did like one squat with like a super like heavy slow resistance, like super slow lower, super slow raise. And it was cool because like the force was like flatlined. So even though like I felt like I was working really hard, the amount of force I was putting into the ground was almost constant, which is kind of cool, right? But then I took the same weight and I did like a quick drop and catch squat, where it's like a half catch, and my peak impulse like skyrocketed to like 4 or 5 times what I had generated with the slow tempo squat. And to me, like that, like it theoretically makes sense, but it's really cool to actually like envision and see graphically that weight is only one contributor for how we generate force and how we tolerate force. So all of that's to say, like, if you think about something like sprinting, where someone is literally bounding off the ground with every single step, they can be generating like 5, 6 times body weight through a single limb for like a tenth of a second. So the reality is, a lot of the stuff we're doing from a training standpoint, we were never going to emulate those types of demands in the weight room or in the gym without actually doing the movement. But we do have a lot of abilities like early on to say, like, the safest thing this person can do right now is going to be slow, like quote unquote heavy slow resistance, because the relative force that they're putting into the ground is fairly constant. but the force, like the work of their tissue is going to be very high. But the second you start adding more of like a ballistic moment to it, whether it's like a quick drop or like a rebound, now the impulse and the force demands get a lot higher. And that kind of, it just makes sense from like how we normally progress things, but it's kind of like a proof of concept for, in order to get to this point, we need to make sure we've developed the prerequisite abilities. And the most intelligent way to do that is kind of building a foundation of like local tissue capacities, then getting up to like more local force capacities, then getting into more like the integrated, and then more of our like explosive reactive strength. So that's a very long-winded answer of saying like, there's a reason that we progress things in the way we do. And oftentimes it's to mitigate like excessive magnitudes of force or excessive amounts of impulse that our body's not yet capable of tolerating. So like our weight room in many ways should be the safest thing we do because it's the most constrained and it should be the most isolated to the tissues that we need to actually create some kind of adaptation in.